Hello! Welcome back to the Infinite Library. I'm Kyla, and today I'm going to be doing that video that basically every booktuber is doing at this time of year, and talking about some of their most anticipated books of next year. So I have done a lot of searching around, I've looked at a lot of series and authors that I like, and I've come up with a list of about over 30 or so. I am not expecting to read all of these books next year, particularly because I'm going to be trying to prioritise my physical TBR, but some of these I'll definitely be reading. Some of them I have pre-ordered, I think, and there's some that I'm just really excited to get to. A lot of the other ones are just books I'm interested in, so they're on my radar. I don't know if I'll get to them. They're probably books that I'll wait to see what reviews are like when they come out, but they're all books that I kind of think are interesting, and I thought I'd just kind of talk about them here to see if there's any of these books that you haven't heard of before and books you might find interesting. A lot of these are fantasy, there are a couple of horror sprinkled in there, a couple of non-fantasy, but fantasy is kind of my wheelhouse, so most of those do fall within that genre. And here we go. Okay, so we're actually going to start with an end of December release, but it's going to be one that I'll end up reading in the new year anyway, and most people will too, I imagine. And that is the second book in the Letters of Enchantment series, Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. It's expected to publish around December the 26th, but I'd imagine depending on various postage, that kind of thing, a lot of people probably get this in January anyway. I'm really excited for this one. I loved Divine Rivals. I am really excited to see what happens in this book, so this is probably one of my most anticipated ones for next year. Then into the January releases, we have the third and I presume final book in the Atlas series, which is the Atlas Complex by Olivia Blake, which is releasing on January the 9th. I wasn't huge on the second book in the series, but I loved the first one, and I am just really excited to see where this ends, basically. I presume this is going to be the finale. So yeah, another one that I'm excited to read. I buddy read the first two with a friend, so I'll probably end up doing the same again for this one. Also, on January the 9th, we have the 9th book in the Wayward Children series by Shauna Maguire, Mislaid in Parts Half Known. This one's about dinosaurs, so that's fun if you like portal fantasy. I don't want to say it's cozy fantasy, but it feels like a cozy series to me. I just really love this series. So yeah, that is coming out early January. January the 16th, apparently. I say apparently, my copy is arriving earlier. My copy has probably already arrived by the time this video goes up. I'm not sure why it got released so early for me here in the UK, but I'm not complaining because I want to read it, is the second book in the Emily Wilde series by Heather Fawcett, Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands. If you haven't read the first book, basically this is about a scholar called Emily Wilde who is sort of making her own encyclopedia of fairies, and she goes away to this kind of Nordic country, and her academic rival also kind of goes along, and they get embroiled in this sort of mystery around the fairies there. In this one, I believe she is going to be looking at making a map of the realms of fairy. And yeah, this one is going to be set in Austria. I don't know if it's going to be a bit more of a spring one. The first one was very wintry, but the cover gives me spring vibes. And I really love the first book, so I'm very excited to read the sequel. Editing Kyla here. So, for some reason, the rest of the January books didn't actually record, so I'm re-recording this now, so sorry if this isn't the best summary that there could be. But carrying on with January, on January the 16th also, we have Most Ardently, a Pride and Prejudice remix by Gabe Cole Novoa, which is about a trans boy searching for future and romance in a YA reimagining of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Just really excited to see what they're going to do with this, to be honest. I love anything that's kind of gender swapped, and I am really wanting to see this. This is part of the Remixed Classics series. They've done a couple of different ones, I think, but I'm really intrigued to see how this one's going to turn out. Also on January the 16th, we have The Longest Autumn by Amy Avery, which is a mythology fantasy romance about a woman who ends up escorting a god of autumn between the godly and human realms. On January the 18th, we have the much anticipated Voyage of the Damned by Frances White. I'm already got like a copy of this coming to me by a pre-order, and I'm pretty sure some people know there are special editions of this also coming along, one of which I'll be getting. But this one sounds so much fun. It is a LGBT fantasy murder mystery set on a ship, where these 12 different heirs of different places are all supposed to be traveling to the sacred goddess's mountain, and then one of them is murdered and everyone is a suspect. It sounds so much fun. I can't wait to read this. Last one for January is The Invocations by Crystal Sutherland. This is by the same author of House of Hollow, which I haven't read yet, but I am dying to read it. And it is a YA fantasy horror book about witches. It sounds really interesting. Basically, it's kind of about this girl called Zara, and her sister was murdered by a serial killer, and she gets involved in a coven to sort of try and take her power back and bring her sister back from the dead. And there are some other girls as well that also get involved in this coven, and it sounds really interesting. Just that premise alone, I'm dying to read this. So on to February releases. On February the 13th, we have the third and apparently final book in the Deathless series by Namina Fauna, which is The Eternal Ones. The first book in this series is The Gilded Ones, and it is about a group of women who bleed gold. I don't really want to say much more about it because it has some really good twists and turns. I really enjoyed the first book, and I haven't read the second book yet. I've not really heard very many people talking about it, so I just kind of wanted to put this in here as the finale is coming out if anyone is interested, because I really enjoyed this series. It's a YA fantasy series. There's a lot of feminism. It delves into sci-fi as well. And yeah, I really enjoyed the first book and would highly recommend this series. On February the 13th, we have Dead Things Are Closer Than They Appear by Robin Wasley, which is a YA fantasy paranormal romance. There isn't a lot about this on here, to be honest, but it says it's perfect for fans of the Raven Boys, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and the rest of us just live here. It's set in a high school that has an apocalypse going on around it, and the main girl is basically like a normal girl in an abnormal town. It has Asian representation, and yeah, it sounds like it's gonna be kind of a lot of fun. There's like monsters and fighting, and the world just sounds really interesting. She also has a missing brother who she's trying to find, and she ends up joining this group of people who are guardians who try and protect the seal that is where the monsters are coming into town. So I can see the Buffy kind of comparison there. But yeah, that sounds really fun. On February the 13th, we have An Education in Malice, which is the second book by S.T. Gibson. She released Dowry of Blood the year before last, I believe, which is kind of like a Dracula retelling from the perspective of the bride. This is another vampire story, but it's kind of like a gothic, dark academia fantasy horror, I believe, about this girl who goes to school and meets the beautiful and enigmatic Carmilla. So I'm very down for this. I'm just anything. This is just everything I want to read in a book, basically. So I'm very excited to read this. The author also has another book coming out in May called Evocation, which is a urban fantasy romance. And this one sounds very different from the other two. This one is about a teenage psychic prodigy whose father is kind of like an occultist, and there is a deal with the devil involved. Apparently it's a new series from this author, and it looks really good. So yeah, another one to be aware of coming out next year. On February the 20th, we have the first book in a new series by Hafsa Faisal, who wrote We Hunt the Flame. It is A Tempest of Tea. Just the name alone, honestly, makes me want to read this, and the front cover is absolutely gorgeous. This is a YA fantasy historical fiction about vampires. So this is actually, it's a duology, actually, looking at Goodreads. But yeah, basically, this is about a female criminal mastermind and collector of secrets who runs a tea room which caters to vampires at nighttime and turns into a bloodhouse. And basically, her establishment is threatened, and she's forced to strike a deal and has to infiltrate a vampire society known as the Ethereum. This sounds really exciting. I'm really hyped for this one. Next in February, there's so many horror releases in February. So yeah, February is the time for horror, apparently. Releasing on February the 20th is My Throat an Open Grave by Tori Bavellino. There's not a lot of info about this one, but it kind of gives me Labyrinth vibes. The main girl, her baby brother, is taken away by the Lord of the Wood, and she must face the dangers of the wood and write a song to bring her baby brother back. And it does say it's a retelling. It doesn't say what it's a retelling of, so I am not entirely sure, but someone did just say that it is Labyrinth inspired down in the review. So yeah, I was right. It is kind of like a horror take on Labyrinth, and that's honestly all I need to know. I am definitely reading this. February the 20th, we also have the first book in a new series by Melissa Marr. I haven't read anything by this author in a long time. What are the other books that she's read? So she read some books I really liked when I was in my teens. Have I reread them recently? I was gonna reread them. I feel like they're not gonna hold up. I'll be honest, she wrote the Wicked Lovely series. I read the first 3, I loved them, but I read them a long time ago, back in 2010, and I feel like they probably won't hold up, but she hasn't written anything in quite a while, and now she's bringing a new series out, which is a adult queer romantasy. It's described as The Magicians Meet One Last Stop, and it's called Remedial Magic, and it is about an unassuming library who has fallen in love with a powerful witch and must attend a magical community college to learn how to save her new world from complete destruction. It actually sounds really cozy. I'm just really interested to see what her new books are like, because I loved her books when I was younger. I haven't reread them to see if they'd hold up, but I'm excited to see what her new series is like. And then finally, the last release I'm looking forward to in February is on February the 27th. So this is a book by an author called Eliza Chan, the start of a new series called Fathom Folk. And it is a high fantasy mythology in kind of like a mythic sort of story in a semi-submerged city. So a lot of it is about sirens, sea witches, mermaids, that kind of thing. And it follows a half siren called Mira, who is promoted to be captain of the border guard. And it sounds like it's just going to be kind of like a really interesting political fantasy kind of story. Yeah, because it talks about extremist sabotage and annual boat race, violence erupts, and there is a clampdown on Fathom Folk's rights. I guess the Fathom Folk are the sea people that live under the water. So yeah, it sounds really interesting. I'm really interested to see this kind of like underwater fantasy world. Next we have our March releases, and we have a graphic novel YA fantasy LGBT book called The Marble Queen by Anna Kopp and Gabrielle Kari. This is described as Nimona meets The Princess and the Dressmaker, and it is a sapphic romance surrounded by a mist of magic. And it is about a princess called Amelia, and she has to save her country through a marriage alliance and finds out that her betrothed isn't the country's prince, in fact, but a recently coronated queen. So it sounds like it's going to be cute and romantic and a lot of fun, so that is one I'm definitely going to be reading. On March the 19th, we have Where Sleeping Girls Lie by Farida Abike Ayamide. It is from the same author of Ace of Spades, which I know was a really popular sort of thriller book. I did read it and I quite liked it, but it didn't like fully click with me. But this one I think sounds really interesting. It's an LGBT YA mystery thriller. Dark academia again, I believe, but it's about a girl who is new to a boarding school and discovers dark secrets and cover-ups after her roommate mysteriously disappears, and she catches the attention of these girls known as the Unholy Trinity. And yeah, it sounds really interesting. It's giving me bunny vibes, to be honest. So yeah, one to be aware of, especially if you really enjoyed Ace of Spades. March the 19th, we have A Botanical Daughter, which is a queer horror historical fiction, described as Mexican Gothic meets the Lie Tree by way of Oscar Wilde and Mary Shelley, and is about two Victorian gentlemen who hide their relationship away in a botanical garden whilst embarking on a Frankenstein-style experiment. I love Frankenstein, it's one of my favourite Gothic novels, so yeah, this just sounds really interesting to me and definitely one that is on my radar. And finally, on March the 19th, we have a queer sci-fi mystery called Floating Hotel by Grace Curtis. It's described as a cozy found family sci-fi novel as well as a mystery. Every guest has a secret, every member of staff a universe unto themselves, and it looks like it's centered around someone called Carl, who is the caretaker of the hotel. It just sounds really interesting. Yeah, something that is a bit different in terms of sci-fi. So yeah, one I'm hopefully going to be checking out at some point. So in April, on April the 2nd, we have a new book by F.T. Lukens, who writes a lot of queer fantasy romance kind of books, like those. So this is a Forever After and Spellbound. This one is about a 17-year-old called Ellery who doesn't believe in magic, basically, in a region where everyone thinks that magic is real. They've been stuck in a 5-year winter. They meet someone called Nox, who is a familiar from the otherworld and a magical assistant sent to help humans who have made crossroad bargains. It doesn't really explain too much about what's happening in the story, to be honest, in terms of this, but I'm sort of like, will always put books by this author on my radar because I think they have some really interesting ideas and I like their characters. So yeah, basically, it sounds like they make a bargain. Then we have, also on April the 2nd, I believe, another book by Sangu Mandana, who wrote The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. And this looks like it's going to be in the same kind of vein. It's a cozy fantasy romance called A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping. And it is about a witch called Sarah, who is one of the most powerful witches in Britain. And she resurrected her great aunt Jasmine, lost her magic, befriended a semi-villainous talking fox, and was exiled from her magical guild. So she is now basically going to help her aunt run an inn in Lancashire. And she learns about an old spell book, and she meets a historian nearby who can help her sort of unlock the book's mysteries. And yeah, it sounds really fun. So I know that first book was really popular. I do have it, but haven't read it yet. But I'm sure people who love the first book will want to check this out. Then on April the 9th, Leigh Bardugo is releasing a adult fantasy historical fiction called The Familiar. It is set during the Spanish Golden Age in Madrid, and it is about a maid who uses scraps of magic to get through her day, and her mistress who sort of tries to use her, essentially. Sounds really interesting. I have a bit of an iffy relationship with Leigh Bardugo's books so far. I really loved the Six of Crows series, but I wasn't too keen on Shadow and Bone, and I haven't checked out like Hellbent, Ninth House, that series yet, but this one sounds quite interesting. So it sounds very different from the other things she's written, like something so embedded in like a historical place. So yeah, one to be kind of on my radar. Then on April the 16th, we have To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods by Molly X. Chang, which is a fantasy, epic fantasy about a young woman cursed with the power of death, trying to decide if saving her family is worth betraying her country. So this is an Asian epic fantasy. She can basically, the main protagonist, Ryuying has the ability to pull the life out of mortal bodies. And she will do anything to keep her family safe, but her gift is discovered by an enemy's prince and he makes her a deal. I don't know if there's... Yeah, this is her debut novel, so yeah, one to be aware of if you're interested in new authors. And then finally, on April the 16th, we have an LGBT contemporary romance. I know, I don't talk about those very often, but the cover of this one really just drew me in, and it is a opposite attract romance about a girl called Opal who won the lottery and it ruined her life. Basically, people keep taking advantage of her, so she ends up putting all her money into a failing flower farm in North Carolina, and she plans to just sort of move there and like isolate herself and preserve herself, but then she meets a woman called Pepper who says that she is in fact the rightful owner of the farm and isn't moving out, so they have to strike up an agreement of cohabitation, and it sounds really fun. It sounds like it's gonna be kind of like a cute rom-com kind of thing, and the whole story just sounds interesting. Opal sounds like such an interesting protagonist, so yeah, one to be aware of for romance readers. Okay, getting to our final books now. I don't really have many books past sort of August, September time, so we're getting to the end of this list. And now we are on May, and we're starting off with a horror. There is a new Christina Henry book coming out called The House That Horror Built, which is a gothic adult horror about a single mother working in a gothic mansion of a reclusive horror director who stumbles upon terrifying secrets. It sounds like it's going to be like, for people that love like horror movies and film lore, sounds like it's going to be really fun. I'm expecting there to be sort of like lots of like little in-jokes and stuff. But yeah, so basically she cleans this movie director's house, but she starts hearing noises from behind a locked door that sound remarkably like a human voice calling for help. June the 4th, we have the third book, and I believe the finale in the Between Earth and Sky series by Rebecca Roanhorse, Mirrored Heavens. I read the first book in this series, which was Black Sun, and I absolutely adored it. I haven't read the second book yet, and I've heard not everyone liked the second book. Yeah, basically, if you already love the series, then you'll be excited about this third book coming out, but otherwise you might not be. But it's a really interesting Indonesian sci-fi fantasy that is also queer. And yeah, go and look into it, basically, if you haven't read it. I really enjoyed it, and I'm most likely going to be picking this up once I've read the second book, finally. Then we have another horror book in June. June, apparently, like February, is also the month of horror. And it is by Craig DeLuey, and it's called How to Make a Horror Movie and Survive. And it is described as a darkly humorous horror novel that sees a famous 80s slasher director set out to shoot the most terrifying horror movie ever, made using a cult camera that might be, and probably is, demonic. This sounds really fun, honestly. It sounds like it's gonna be like a kind of a parody comedy, but maybe have some like real scares. So it's all about like this famous horror director. It's a girl who has dreamed of being like the final girl and will basically stop at nothing to be the final girl in his movie. And yeah, it sounds really fun. It also says it's a media tie-in, so I'm wondering if there is going to be like a movie or a TV series which is going to be going along with this, which I can kind of see happening. There's not really much else about this yet on the Goodreads, but basically this author's written a lot of horror stuff. He most recently wrote episode 13, I think was his most recent book, but it sounds really interesting. It sounds very up my alley because I love horror movies, so one I'll definitely be checking out. Moving on to August, we have Mistress of Lies by K.M. Enright, which is a fantasy adult queer book about vampires. Essentially, it is about a woman called Shan, who is the daughter of a powerful but disgraced blood worker. Basically, she works with blood magic and has a network of spies. Apparently, it says that she has to protect her brother, and she assassinates her father to take his place at the head of the family. And she is on mission of revenge, basically, that looks like it ends up involving her into the court of a vampire king. But I don't need a lot to sell me on a book, honestly. If it's vampire, it's LGBT, and it's fantasy, I'm probably going to be down. Then on July the 9th, we have on the total other end of the spectrum, a cottagecore cozy fantasy book called The Spell Shop by Sarah Beth Durst. This is about a woman who has an unexpected journey through the low-stakes market of illegal spell selling and the high-risk business of starting over. She is a librarian, and her assistant Kaz, who is a sentient spider plant, have apparently spent like most of the last 11 years like protecting spell books for the city's elite, but then the library goes up in flames and she ends up fleeing to this like faraway island, and there's probably some romance as well. And yeah, it sounds really cute. It sounds like it's gonna be a good time, and it's giving me Legends and Lattes vibes. So also in July, this probably isn't going to mean a lot to many people who don't know the series, but essentially there's this D&D live play called Critical Role, and they do these like novel tie-ins sometimes, and I've not read any of them yet, but the author for this one is what made me really interested. So the book is called Critical Role, Hell's Bells, What Doesn't Break, and it's centering on this like undead spellcaster who's a character in the party, and the writer is Cassandra Core. So I didn't like Cassandra Core's first book, Nothing But Black and Teeth, but I loved her second book, which was about the mermaid. So I'm really intrigued as to how she's going to do this and if it's going to turn out well, because I think that the first book was kind of modern horror, and I don't think that clicked. But then she went into like more like historical, more fantasy sort of horror in her second book, and that is what this character is, that is what this world is. So I really think she's going to be a really good fit for this book. Something I'm very excited about. This is a prequel series, which is a prequel story, which is following this woman called Lordna, who essentially makes like a pact after her death or before her death. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. But basically she is undead and she has magic, and she's a very sort of like creepy but very heartwarming character as well. So yeah, I don't know if it would work to read if you didn't know the Critical Role series, but I'm really excited about this one anyway, because I love this character. I've really grown to like this author now, so yeah, I'm really excited to see what they do with it. On August the 6th, there is an expected new book by Casey McQuistion, same author of Red, White and Royal Blue and One Last Stop, called The Pairing. There isn't a cover yet for this, but it's basically, the info we do know about it is that it is a romantic comedy about two bisexual exes who accidentally book the same European food and wine tour and challenge each other to an international hookup competition to prove they're over each other. And obviously they're not over each other. So the premise itself doesn't necessarily like appeal to me, but I really enjoyed what I've read so far by Casey McQuistion, so I will definitely be checking this out. Then in August the 20th, we have a new book by T. Kingfisher, which is a horror fantasy retelling. It's a retelling of Grimm's Goose Girl, and it's called A Sorceress Comes to Call. It is about a woman called Cordelia, whose mother is unusual, and her house has lots of secrets. Basically, her mother is a sorceress, and there is a suspicious death in the small town, and Cordelia's mother insists that they leave, so they arrive at this sort of remote country manor, and it looks like there's things afoot, essentially. It sounds really interesting, and yeah, I really like T. Kingfisher's fantasy books, so I'm really excited for this to come out. We have an updated date for the second book in the Iron Widow series by Ziran J. Zhao, Heavenly Tyrant. It was originally set for April the 30th, but it looks like it's been moved now to the 3rd of September. Yeah, I really want this to come out. I mean, the author, please take as much time as you need to write this, because the first book was amazing, and I want the sequel to be as amazing as it is, but my gosh, I really want this to come out soon. I am so excited to read this. I adored the first book. For anyone that doesn't know about it, it is a fantasy sci-fi like LGBT series about a girl called Zetian who ends up on a mission of revenge after her sister is kind of killed as like a concubine pilot inside these mechs that are like being driven by these like men. And she ends up changing the whole like status quo essentially of that and gets paired up with someone. I don't really want to say more about it because the first book was just amazing. It's really feminist, it's very political, and I just loved the characters, I loved the romance, and yeah, it's just amazing. I am so excited for the second book to be coming out, so hopefully next year, fingers crossed. Also another book that has been pushed back. It was originally a February release, I believe, but it now looks like it's been changed to September the 17th, and that is A Dark and Drowning Tide by Alison Saft, which is a fantasy lesbian romance that looks to be kind of like a dark academia book. It is about a folklorist called Laura Lee who is on an expedition with 6 eccentric nobles in search of a fabled spring. But the expedition gets off to a harrowing start when Laura Lee's mentor is murdered in the ship, and the only person that Laura Lee knows is innocent and can actually work with is her longtime academic rival, the insufferably gallant and maddeningly beautiful Sylvia von Wolf. So they are having to work together to uncover the truth of the mystery. The cover for this is absolutely gorgeous. It's what drew this to me automatically, but the story itself also sounds really up my alley. So yeah, another one to be aware of if you're interested in like sapphic gothic mysteries. So finally we are at the books which don't necessarily have any official dates yet, but which are sort of have provisional dates and they might change, or they haven't got any dates yet. So there is an expected publication date of July the 30th for this one, and it is a new book by Heather Walter, who wrote the Malice Mistral series, which was like a Sleeping Beauty retelling, and this is called The Crimson Crown, and it's going to be a Snow White retelling. It's a queer witchy reimagining, which obviously will follow like the villain of the piece. So we're going to see it from the side of the evil queen. I don't know if this is going to be like how it was in the other book, where it's going to be sort of like a romance between the evil queen and the Snow White character, although it does kind of say that it looks like it's going to be a figure from her past. I am excited for this. I really enjoyed the Malice series, and I'm excited to see what she's going to do with Snow White, because I feel like we haven't seen as much retelling wise done of Snow White, but we've seen obviously a lot of Sleeping Beauty. We also have not one but 2 books by Madeline Miller that are rumoured to come out. So the first one was announced quite a while ago, and it's supposed to be, there's no titles for either of these yet, but the first one is supposed to be a retelling of Shakespeare's The Tempest. It's still on Goodreads as a expected publication date of January the 1st, but I don't think that's going to happen, because she's actually said that she's now working on a different book altogether, which is going to be a Persephone retelling. There's no dates for that coming out. Obviously, this other book is not going to be coming out in January at this point, because she's now working on the Persephone one. I'd be more interested in the Tempest retelling, to be honest, than the Persephone, just because there's so many Persephone books out there. But it's also Madeline Miller's wheelhouse is, you know, Greek mythology, and I'll still be interested to read what she writes, because I really enjoyed Song of Achilles. I liked Circe, but not quite as much, and I really liked Galatea. So yeah, 2 books by her to be on the radar. Who knows if they'll actually come out next year? It might be the year after. And then finally, this has an expected publication of September the 10th. So it does have a cover, so it's possible it will be coming out in September, but it was only very recently announced, so it might get pushed back. But it is a new book by TJ Klune, and it is a sequel to his really popular book, The House in the Cerulean Sea, called Somewhere Beyond the Sea. Can't really say much about this because I haven't read The House in the Cerulean Sea yet by him, but I know it's really popular. I was not expecting there to be a sequel, so it's really interesting that he's like going back to this book that is one of his most popular. So that comes to about 36 or so books that are coming out hopefully all next year, that I have kind of are interested in, want to read, or just have on my radar, so I'm kind of just keeping an eye out for them. Let me know down below if there's any sort of ones that you think I've missed out, if there's anything else I should maybe be aware of, if there's any of them that you're really excited also coming out. I am really excited for some of these. I'm hoping it's going to be a good year of releases. So, until next time, stay safe, stay cozy, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!